Hi there, and I'm Raymond Gauker. I am here in community media. I'll be your host. This is the show called Open House. This is the show that we bring amazing people from the community into our studio to share their passion, what they're doing for the community, and how it's helping. And we have Jim McClure with us today. And Jim is a journalist, I would say, to begin with. Jim, I'm going to kind of introduce you here, and let's see how it goes. So you're a retired editor for the York Daily Record. Mm-hmm. Okay. How many years were you there?
30 years altogether. I was there 15 years as managing editor, then 15 years as editor of the paper.
So the editor of the paper, is that like the person who chooses all the stories? And what was your job description?
Yeah, the editor of a newspaper in today's world, I mean, you do editing and you might do some reporting, but a paper the size of a news organization, as we called it, really there's a lot of other things you do. You hire, fire, and you interview, candidates. You're involved in a lot of administrative things, but you're also involved in a lot of community things. And so I tried to do all of that. And then for much of my time as editor of the Daily Record, I also had oversight over Chambersburg Public Opinion, the Hanover Evening Sun, Lebanon Daily News, and other newsrooms throughout the Northeast for the companies I worked with. So you had to kind of bundle all that and balance all that, which was quite a job.
So you were a manager, an administrator,
right?
But but you loved getting in there and getting the story, it seems.
Yeah, the thing about one of the things about over the course of history, newspaper people have often gravitated to history and been historians of their community, because really when you're dealing with journalism, you're dealing with the current draft of history, as they say. And and there's a lot of times when you do journalism, you're having to go back and look at files to see what happened before. So really you're covering the first draft of history as a journalist, but really you spend a lot of time going back and looking at context. Mm-hmm. And so back when I started the Daily Record in about 1989, I retired in 2019, so after this 30 years in there, I decided to get a master's degree in American Studies at Penn State Harrisburg. And it was really a good experience. I went there to try to get, that master's degree so I might be able to teach and have other opportunities if things went south in journalism. But what happened was the American Studies work up at Penn State Harrisburg opened up great new doors of knowledge and interest, and it kind of unlocked a lot of the things that I was interested in. And I was able to study regional newspaper history. So it really fit in well with my role as editor. I was studying the newspaper, for example, that I was editing. And I was researching the early days of the newspaper. The newspaper, by the way, is 230 years old this year. And so there's a lot of history that I was able to cover that way. So when I was going through there, it was interesting that I would cover a lot of microfilm. I would see a lot of news events, and and so I was able to not only do journalism history, but also do history of understand the history of what was happening in the community itself. And so in 1999, the 250th anniversary of York County was coming up, and so I thought, well, I have all this information from my master's work, my thesis, all this stuff. Why don't I put it into a book? And we did that in conjunction with the 250th of York County. And it became, the newspaper ran a copy of it, about 90,000 copies of it, to be distributed with the paper itself as part of the celebration. And so I was a first-time author with 90,000 press run right off the bat. And then we said, oh, this might sell. So we put it on Gladfelter paper, and it sold, went through 3 editions. So that book is called Never Be Forgotten. And so one of the things I learned from that, and this is something that maybe other historians should look at or would look at, is that if you're able to tie your work to community events, then the community appreciates it and you benefit the community in a big way, but your work also has more legs. And so I did that with, there's a book called 9 Months in Yorktown that I did. That was in conjunction with the 225th anniversary of the adoption of the Articles of Confederation in York in 2002.
Okay.
So, and then I did other books. I did a book on Black history in York County, and that was in conjunction with a 25th conference on Black history in Pennsylvania. And then I did a book on east of Gettysburg called East of Gettysburg, which was on the Gordon and early raid of York County, and that was conjunction with the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. So if you're able to tie those in, then it really gives a lot more legs.
And does it increase your passion?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if there's nothing worse than write something and then no one seemingly reads it. Although I do think that many people that write things it's read by more than they might think. And maybe we could talk about that in a second. But when you're able to do these works in conjunction with things that the community is involved with, then it's obvious they're proud of the book. They're proud that you did a book in conjunction with the event, that you would invest that type of time in the community. And so it's and another thing that about these the first 5 books I did, another book I didn't mention yet called In the Thick of the Fight, which was York County in World War II. All these books, those 5 books we've covered, it was really the first book on Civil War in York County. A monograph on the Civil War in York County. First book on Black history in York County. Now, Never Be Forgotten was a general history, but there hadn't been a general history done in something like 25 years. And so, in many of our communities, we have people that talk a lot about history, but it's another thing actually to put that history down into a book. It's a whole nother level of commitment. And many times in our community over the course of time, that hasn't happened. In York County, I think since some of these successes, people could see these successes of some of these projects, it kind of opened the doors and they want to do books. And now you can do that. You can self-publish on Amazon, and there's a lot more levers to push for an author today than they did at one time.
But the amazing reality of what you have done, Jim, is your community was celebrating.
That's right.
There was an event. You gave substance to that celebration.
Yeah.
Because that you want the extra effort, you brought the reality of what it was that you were celebrating. You brought the awareness of, hey, this is what it was like. This is what we've gone through as a community. And this is why we're doing what we're doing now. You've created a lot of community pride. Mm. You know?
Well, thank you. Well, it does give a sense of authority that you're basing a community event around a work. It doesn't, in today's world, it doesn't necessarily have to be a written work like a book, although books are still important. It could be a series like we're talking about here. It could be something just that's on the web, that lives on the web. It could be something but the best projects really marry all these, and the best projects do have some type of written publication along with it. It also gives a community a sense of gravitas, that you have a book to base the event on. And so it's, but that's what I would tell people. If you have an anniversary coming up, like a borough, like New Oxford Borough or any borough, York, New Salem, I think this year, or New Salem Borough has an anniversary coming up. And so if they can get a book in conjunction with that, then it does add to the celebration.
Jim McClure, born and raised.
Yeah, I was born in a little river town in Kentucky, on the border with Indiana. It was on the Ohio River, and interesting here in New York, I'm on a border in a border county, next to a river. So it's kind of interesting. In Kentucky, it was where north meets south, and in New York County, Adams County, it's where north meets south. It's where the Mason-Dixon line runs, and so there's a lot of similarities between growing up in Kentucky and then and living here in my adult life in York County.
At what point in your life did you find that you like to be an observer and you like to tell stories?
Yeah, that is really kind of, and when you look at the national scene today, you may not feel like this is the case, but, you're really trained in journalism, you're educated in journalism to be an observer, and not necessarily, if there's a parade, you're not supposed to lead the parade, you're not supposed to march in the parade, you're not supposed to be at the end of the parade, you're better to be on the balcony observing the parade. Now that's changed a little bit in recent years. Many journalists nowadays look to become involved civically in their communities, and they're not as detached as they once were. And I think that it helps you to see what I've done with these books is you're not leading the parade, but maybe you're part of the parade more. But you still feel really comfortable up in that balcony. Mm-hmm. And if you ever don't feel comfortable up in that balcony, well, then maybe you've lost your perspective. Mm-hmm. Perhaps that's what's happened on the national scene and with some of the national media. But when you're on the community level, you need to you daren't lead the parade, but you daren't avoid the parade altogether, which happens sometimes.
First article you ever wrote?
Yeah, I started writing sports in high school, and I would have covered our high school in Meade County High School in Brandenburg, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember the game it was, but I would cover basketball. And in college, I started off as a sports writer. And really, it's interesting. Many journalists have started in sports, and there's great opportunity for storytelling, and that's where you get your kind of get used to that, and then you move into news, and it's a little easier after you've done sports reporting.
Sports is harder.
Yeah, I don't know if it's harder. I think really doing news reporting. Well, really, sports reporting is news reporting. You're just covering a different type of news. You're covering sports news. And so they both have their challenges if you do them right. In both cases, if you are really very steady and hard-nosed, but compassionate at the same time, you have to kind of marry those skills. You'll have some people that will refuse to talk to you in both areas. There are people that just love to talk to you. So you have to grow used to the cold shoulder. You have to grow used to the kind of people trying to play you for a story.
And then it's the style that you go about. I mean, when you do a story for when you do a story for sports, are you trying to just give the facts? Or are you trying to put in some of the emotions, some of the challenges, some of the personality of the individuals that are participating?
Yeah, and you could do that in news as well. There's featured news stories and there's hard news stories, and really it just depends on the story how you really leverage those types of things. If you're covering the story involving the shooting of a police officer, you pretty well have to stick to the facts. You can bring in some scenery types of things and so on, but you have to be really careful, because if you're in those cases, it may seem like you're playing on taking advantage of a situation. In other types of stories that aren't that quite severe, you have a lot more latitude to really tell stories in a freer way.
So you're in college. What brought you in? What were you thinking? What was your goal you're doing sports, you're having this experience. Sometimes you do stories and it's like, I did better than I did the last time. Do you get this rush, excitement when you say something a little bit better than you wrote it the last time? I mean, I'm asking two questions right now.
Yeah.
One is the personal experience that you're having in college and how that might have led you to the vision of what you wanted to do out of school. What happened there?
Yeah, I started as a pre-med major, and I grew up in Kentucky, but I went to school at Pitt at Johnstown, and so I was from the South, went to school in the North, and which was an experience in itself. And I started off as a pre-med major, but as many folks, I couldn't handle the organic chemistry. And so, but at the same time, I found myself spending more time in the newspaper, with the newspaper, and I was writing sports for the newspaper from the time I was a freshman. And so, whenever I changed over to journalism, it was my sophomore year, I started doing other types of news and became an editor of the paper. And so, I just found I was gravitating to my area of interest, and that's what I would urge everybody to do is, young people out there, is to, what are you good at? What's your area of interest? But another thing that I've talked about that all my career, to try to gravitate towards your interest. But in the last 10 years, I've started to tell people that, how can you help others in what you do? Maybe even longer than that, maybe it's more than 10 years, but there has to be more than this self-fulfillment, this self-interest. There has to be this idea that I'm doing something good for the community. I'm doing something good for other people. Even today, one of the things I'd like to do is find somebody or some situation that is unknown or is not very well known, and do what I call hoisting the situation. I'd like to bring them into the limelight, and whether they want it that way or not. Sometimes they're uncomfortable, but if they have something good that's going on, then I want to be able to bring that out. And I'm thinking, just parenthetically here, I'm thinking that this, what you do here and what the New Oxford area Historical Society does are really undervalued jewels that need to have a wider exposure. So that's one of the reasons we're here today, is I really want to reward good work like that. And so that's maybe going backwards. That is something that really, I always wanted to do that. And I think really after I got out into the world of journalism, that feeling grew, that you're really in there not for yourself, although there's gratification in writing a story, but there's something good about doing something for the community and others. Mm-hmm. There's something very good about that. There's one thing that many journalists will tell you, and I go through this all the time, is you really do hate to write, but you love to have written. When you're done writing a piece and you have it, then that's when you get that gratification that we're talking about. And then whenever it's out there, published, then it's again, that word lever. It's a lever for good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our model here, our motto, is that we celebrate who we are and what we do as a community. And everything that we pretty much do, it's like you do. We're uplifting people, letting others see what these individuals have done, and I can appreciate how you put forth. You have a project, you're writing the article, it's done. You look at your style, you look at your craft. You're excited about some things because you might have used something a little bit different, or you just used the ink pen and told the story the way you wanted it. But the bottom line is the fact that somebody's bettering from it. There's nothing like the feeling that, hey, I've done all this, and this person, this organization, this group that's committed to our community to make it a better place,
right,
is benefiting from the time and the craft of that was given to you, your gift.
You know, there was a traveling journalist that came through York County. He physically walked from D.C. to New York City. He came through York County, and he looked at what was going on in York County in terms of the history movement that's there going on in York County, and he called it a memory boom. And he noticed that the historians in York County were digging into the past, and there's some things that weren't necessarily pleasant in the past. There always is in every community, but you daren't ignore that. You need to bring it forth in a constructive way, in a way that can be enlightening. Now, there's a philosopher farmer from Kentucky by the name of Wendell Berry, and you know, he writes poetry, writes a lot, and he said, I won't quote this verbatim here, but he said that the first right thing that we need to do as citizens is to take a look at our history, and we need to act daily as critiquers of our history to make sure the poisons from the past don't rise to the current day. And so I think when you do history, when you do journalism, it's the same thing. If you see something that wasn't right in the past, then you need to bring it forward. You daren't ignore it. And so you can help a community in that way as much as just talking about, you know, the luminaries from the past. If you have someone from the past that was very flawed, it will actually help the community to understand, you know, to understand that person better and understand itself better. And I can give you some examples of that at some point, but, you know, I think it's really what Neil King, the journalist, the visiting journalist, saw was that in your county, we're not afraid to go back and find those warts in our past, and then you bring them forward, not out of glee and not to gloat, but to say, look, we made a mistake here. How can we avoid that in the present and the future?
Mm-hmm. So, out of college, did you go straight to York Daily Record?
No, I spent a year at an ad agency. One of the things because it was tough getting a job in journalism in the mid-'70s, one of the things that though is that every experience I've had, I've been able to take advantage of it later in my life. Like the ad agency work, I understand that and understand the importance of being able to market your material. Mm-hmm. And I worked at a small daily in Somerset, Pennsylvania, and then I went to Lewistown, Pennsylvania, where I was editor there in the latter part for about 6 years. The first 3 years I was a reporter. So I was an editor in my late 20s, editor of the paper in Lewistown, Pennsylvania. Then I had an opportunity to go out to California, where I was publisher of 2 small dailies out there. So this was the same company, so I stayed with the same company. Okay. In fact, I'm very proud to say that I have the same employee ID number when I started in 1977 to when I retired in 2019. It was the same. I never left the company from that, but the company changed hands a number of times, but I still had the same ID number.
So what's currently the name of the company?
Well, the company that I ended with was called York Daily Record, and it's owned by Gannett, or now it's called USA Today Company. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The paper started, when I started with it, was owned by a group called Buckner News Alliance. This was York Daily Record, and the Buckner News Alliance owned the 2 California papers and Lewistown papers. So I kind of moved around in the company and kept moving up, and came to York, where I was managing editor and then became editor. So that's how you did it in those days, and you still do to a certain. If you want to stay with the company, then media company, then you can grow within, or you can jump around outside the company. But I decided to stay within the company.
All right, so your passion for history, did it come out of your love for building articles around events? Or was this something that you always had an interest in curiosity of the past?
Yeah, I think that really what happens when you do history is the same thing as when you do journalism. And there is a saying in journalism that journalists afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And I think that it can be the same as with history as well. And there's something about that is right. You know, that if people are too comfortable, they maybe ought to be prodded a little bit. If people are not or if they're just not doing well, they should be hoisted. And so there's something satisfying about both sides of that equation. Mm-hmm. And so that was something it's not something you quote to yourself, but there's this inclination that you always have that, if there's a situation where people are overly proud, maybe you should look at that, and they should look at that a little bit. But particularly if there's a situation in our history that's been neglected, like for example in your county, in 2001 when I was writing Almost Forgotten, the Black History of your county, there had been very little done on Black history. And so there's something satisfying about that, of bringing forth that history in a way. In your county has many very proud people who maybe did things that weren't great for the community, and you got to tell that story too.
So the values that are accepted culturally during certain time periods change. Hopefully they change in the fact that they are refined to a better standard. In a way, this is what I'm finding that you're talking about, and that is the basis behind what you call the movement that's occurring in York, Lancaster area, where there's a lot of local historians that are looking into the past, which you've referred to here, and bringing up some of being somewhat observers of what happened,
right,
and then putting the facts on the table, and then letting it be judged or understood based on what people's values are today.
Right.
Or am I just totally out of the...
There's one other level that we haven't talked yet. I think it ties into that is what really makes you get up in the morning? What is it that really drives you as a journalist or as a historian, as a human being, as a husband, or as a son, and so on? And I think that where the way I operate is I'm a Christian, and I think that I'm called by God to operate. I've been called there, to enter the public square and to do the types of work that we've been talking about here. To be fair and if people are hurting, to try to bring comfort. I think that's part of the calling, my calling as a Christian. And I think and too often in the public square, Christians don't enter the public square. It's a pretty difficult terrain for anybody to enter. And, but a lot of times Christians are reticent about doing that. And I just have always felt like as a Christian, I should do that. I feel like I can do that. I've been given positions that give me opportunity to do that. I've probably been given positions that I really didn't deserve, but because of my position, I was able to have access to people and stories and so on. So I think that's another level here. I'm not saying that you need to be a Christian to be a good journalist or a good historian, but that is really what drives me. Is as part of my daily call. It's part of my call to be able to do the types of things we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. If you don't do it, who's gonna? if you don't tell the story, if you don't bring it to light, and if you don't say, look at this, this needs not to be judged so much. I don't want to say judged so much, but maybe have questions asked. What is the motivation here?
Right.
Well, like you said, this happened. What was the motivation?
Right.
And was the motivation worthy to a certain standard?
Right.
Now, your standard is a standard based on your religion.
Right.
And I can't see how a person can have a religion and do anything and do it without the religion being part of it.
Right.
It's you. If it's not you, then it's not what you believe. I mean, your beliefs should govern every thought that you have, every motivation. And that kind of gets me back to a concept here with the 250th anniversary. Community media is partners with the New Oxford Historic Society. Right. And we're loving the relationship because as you, Jim, have used journalism to bring light to those who are doing great things but not seen, we do the same, What I want to get at is we're starting a relationship with you as a honored and well-noted historian. And from talking to you, I can understand why. Because it seems like the motivation of why things happen, the motivation of why a person did something, the motivation of it being 1760 and what was going on in Yorktown and Lancaster County us all being part of Lancaster County. What is the motivation of those individuals that are moving through Philadelphia, through Lancaster, to York, and out to New Oxford? What are the motivation? What are the values? What are the issues that they're dealing with?
Right.
How do you tell that story? You just tell it with facts, or do you bring it to light through relating their experience to the current experience?
Yeah, I think for starters, we just need to tell that story because in Adams County, Gettysburg area, the story, kind of the narrative, is the Civil War, and in York County, further to the east, over the years, the Revolutionary War was a big deal, and rightfully so. But then it's kind of been eclipsed in recent year by the Civil War. The Civil War is just, when it comes to the historical community, there's more people studying the Civil War than there is doing the American Revolution. And I would think that in this area, it could be that this area, New Oxford and Western York County, now it's Adams County, in the last 150 years since the Civil War, there probably has been relatively little Revolutionary War discussion. And so this is an opportunity with the 250th really just to discover the American Revolution across not only York County, but into current day Adams County. In York County, there's another thing that sidetracked us from the American Revolution, and that is the World War II. York County has a great World War II story. But the American Revolution is something that is so important because Adams County and York County were the same during the American Revolution. So whenever we tell stories about Continental Congress in York County, that involved Adams County at the time. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how many people out in Fairfield in Adams County or even up in Aspers and so on were even aware that they were part of York County, but also that they were part of this great story of the American Revolution too. Their ancestors served in the American Revolution. Maybe there's a way that we can expose them to that. Someone up in Aspers, I mean, we had the militia units from all over York County come in and serve in the American Revolution. And York County meaning Adams County at the time.
And in large numbers,
In
I
large
understand.
numbers, yes.
You know, is it true that the numbers of militia members that came from this area, was it somewhat equal to the other states and colonies? I would have to say colonies. Did we have more people than most, or?
Yeah, it's hard to document that, and there was our first congressman, which York Adams' first congressman was Thomas Hartley, and he was a military man. He said that York County gave more residents, fighting men, to the American Revolution than any other county. That seems unlikely, but if you just take it that he was impressed by the number that served. And it is true that we were known to be patriots on this side of the river. We never really had the kind of the British never overran us. Often whenever the British would overrun an area, the people in the area would change to become loyalists, and because they thought by doing that it would protect their property. In York County, we never had that. We had the leaders of our nation come here, but they were our friends, even though it was a kind of a difficult relationship, as we'll talk about, I'm sure. But they were our friends, so we probably remained fairly patriotic throughout, which meant that recruitment of militia would have been easier, and that we were able to support the war effort in maybe a way that other parts of the 13 colonies couldn't. But that number isn't known.
But the militia fought in Boston?
Yes. Yeah, they were early responders whenever there was the siege of Boston, George Washington's siege of Boston right after Lexington and Concord in 1775. There was a unit called the York Rifles that marched up, they started on July 1st and they marched to Boston in 28 days. That seemed pretty impressive to me. I think it's something like 15 miles a day, something like that. And they participated in the siege of Boston. So we were among the earliest responders in the war. And then after the Declaration of Independence was reached York, a lot of units then went off and served with the Continental Army after that point. And the town, as the story goes, was vacant of everybody but women and older people. So the town of Yorktown had cleared out of military-age guys.
Mm-hmm. So if there was a story through your research that really hasn't been told, what would it be?
Yeah, there's one person that we need to hoist or recognize that I think is very under-recognized is a guy named Henry Lawrence. Henry Lawrence is a South Carolina plantation owner, and he has a difficult past in the sense that he was a major slave holder. He was even in Congress. And he was not only that, but he also would trade slaves, enslave people. But he was here, and after the first month, after John Hancock and John Adams and Samuel Adams left, after we knew that we had the Articles of Confederation in hand, those guys left. He stayed and he was president of Congress for the rest of the 8-month period. There was three of the delegates to Congress in 1777, 78 in York. There's three that stayed all 271 days, and he's one of those. He stayed here. And then later in the war, he was going over on a diplomatic mission, and his ship was to Europe, and his ship was intercepted, and the British intercepted him and threw him in the Tower of London. And he was exchanged for Lord Cornwallis, the British commander who lost at Yorktown. It shows his stature. So, he served in Congress, did all that work in Congress, did all this work. Then he was going over on diplomatic mission, and he was thrown in the Tower of London. And there was even more. His son, John Laurens, who was a friend of George Washington, was a confidant on George Washington. I think that John Laurens was even in a very big part of the musical Hamilton. And at the latter part of the war, the British were leaving, and he decided he was going to skirmish with them as they were leaving, and he was killed. So here we have, and it's said that Henry Lawrence lost his health in the Tower of London. He lost his heart when his son died in a meaningless skirmish at the end of the war. Mm-hmm. So that's the type of story. A lot of times we like to beat up on our founding fathers because they weren't perfect, and here we have a major owner of slaves. Not only that, he did business, not during Congress, but he did business in the courthouse itself where Congress was meeting after session. He would write letters to his overseer saying, maybe you need to separate these slaves and so on. So here you have a man who's fighting for freedom. At the same time, he was ensuring that others wouldn't have freedom. And so we need to appreciate, not condone, but appreciate these complexities. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he gave his life, he gave his son, for our freedoms today.
Mm-hmm. So, one question was, what was his motive? What was his motive? He was doing something that was acceptable at that time. It was acceptable to own slaves,
right,
as a person of his stature.
Right.
But he was also fighting for people of his stature to be able to have their freedom,
right,
and continue what they were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you take someone who's doing something that is socially acceptable, but now would not be, of course?
Yeah.
And place the same judgment you would place on someone in this period to that period.
Yeah, there's this idea in history called presentism, where you take today's values and import them backwards, and then expect those same values to be, accepted or be enlightened back then. But I do think there was enough voices back then saying slavery is wrong, that he should have known, and he did know. And in fact, the reason I can say that is that really enslaved people were gradually manumitted after 1780 in Pennsylvania, only 3 years after Continental Congress was here. So there's recognition in Pennsylvania that slavery was wrong, and that we set out to do something about that. What you will hear from their letters is of the delegates, they'll say, I had to make a living. I had to make a living for my family, and my livelihood was my plantation. In order to run my plantation, I needed enslaved people. Mm-hmm. That's what you would hear, and I think that is a fallacy. I think people will say, I just did what's best for my family, and that's really, it sounds good on the surface, and who wouldn't believe that? Most of us would say that we are doing, but isn't there more to it than that? That's not nothing. That's a lot, but there's a lot more to making decisions and taking positions than just what is right for our family. Because in the case when he's saying, basically I'm doing what's right for my family, that's my livelihood. But what about the livelihood of other people, like his enslaved people? Mm-hmm. What about their families? And so sometimes we have to see that when I say I'm doing what's right for my family, how's that impacting other families? Mm-hmm. And so so you can kind of see the tensions there. And that's what they would say. That's what they would write. I'm not a rich, in this case he was well off. In other cases, a lot of these folks that were here in New York, there's 64 different delegates that were in New York. Not all of them were wealthy. In fact, they were school teachers, they were cobblers. They weren't necessarily wealthy. And so the idea of just like today, you have to be able to make a living. And that's how many of them, that's the only life they knew. The only life they knew was to own enslaved people, to make their farms work. That was wrong. I think in their heart of hearts they knew it was wrong, but that's what they would say. That's the way they negotiated, saying all men are created equal on the one hand, and then not treating people as equal on the other.
That's how they justified it.
That's the way they justified it.
Cool. It's not cool, but to be able to take and put in context what was happening then compared to how we would judge it now. And the interesting thing is how you brought up that, there's certain values that don't change. The value of a human life,
right,
has always been considered sacred. And for someone to propose that they're doing sacred things for society, but at the same time, their behavior shows some type of indifference. That's something that always struck me was people who would come up and say, it's just business. So
that's right.
In other words, you could interact with them and everything's cool, everything's great. And then there's a business transaction, and it could even be with you, but you could see it happen with someone else, and they just say, hey, it's just business, as if there is a different standard. There's a standard for business, and there's a standard for socializing. It's like you, Jim. It's you are a Christian.
Right.
You believe it, and you don't separate it
Right.
from the way you breathe. I mean, it's in everything you do. It's in the way you do your history. It's in the way that you write your stories. It's in the way that you treat people. It's solid.
Yeah, and thank you. It is empowering. I mean, to have, when you study, I tell people that really two areas that we really need to study in your county. We really need. There's a lot of areas, but two among a bunch are the American Revolution that we've been talking about today, and religion in your county. For a young historian, they have to master those two things. They have to master American Revolution. They have to master the knowledge of religious groups in this area, because it's such a big part of what we do. So you have to understand the difference between Reformed people, German Reformed, and Lutherans, and you have to understand the difference between a Catholic and a Lutheran, and so on. You got to understand that if you're going to understand. A good example of someone who I think a lot of people here would know, who kind of mastered those areas, was Charles Gladfelder from Gettysburg College. Charlie, as I knew him, and or I call him Dr. Gladfelder to his face, mm-hmm. But he would write his letters and sign him Charlie whenever he would write to me, and there's a man that knew the American Revolution. He knew the different religious groups. And that was some of his power, is he had mastered those areas. So if you master those areas in your county, then then the other areas will follow from there. And so that's what I tell young historians: you really need to get into that. And I think that's an area as people my generation age out, we really need to replace with younger historians that have those sensibilities.
So, during this time period, the Revolution, what was Yorktown like?
Yeah, it was the largest city, town, about 1,800 people, about 300 homes west of the Susquehanna. It was really a frontier town. And there's maps in my book, 9 Months in Yorktown. I show a Lewis Miller drawing in 1801, and it looks pretty sparse in there. There's a lot of gaps in the town, and it's not Philadelphia by any means. And so when the Continental Congress came here, they came from the best city in America, if not the world. They came here to just a small frontier town. And there's the blessings there. They got their able to get work done. There wasn't a lot of other things to do. They're away from distractions. But it was really a culture shock to be here. And the town struggled really to accommodate them. Just 300 homes, or they would stay in taverns. They often would stay in private homes. In some cases, they would sleep, our leaders would sleep two to a bed. And they weren't used to that. So meanwhile, it worked the opposite way with the British. The British, who had chased them out of Philadelphia in September 1777, loved Philadelphia. And so they couldn't see any reason to go out after these delegates, the America's leaders, the treasonous, those that committed treason. They were enjoying Philadelphia too much.
Life was good.
Life was good. And so so York worked its magic in a way on our delegates. They got the Articles of Confederation done. The Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution of the United States, they got it done. They sent it out to the states for ratification. And Benjamin Franklin over in France could tell the French king and others, look, those 13 colonies, those 13 states can work together. We have a document. Now we can cut a treaty. Because if you don't have a constitution, how do you cut a treaty? There's no document. There's no nation to cut a treaty with. And the other thing that happened in Yorktown in that 9-month period was word came back that we had a decisive victory in the Battle of Saratoga, New York. First time we'd won a major pitched battle in a long time. And so France learned of that and said, boy, those folks over in America, they can win on the battlefield, they can win, they have a constitution, we should come on board, and they did. And in May 4th, 1778, they were able to cut the Continental Congress ratified a treaty to France. France, the largest nation in Europe, was now on board. The whole war had changed to have that ally with the force of France on our side. Couldn't have beaten the British without France, probably.
Okay. So the Constitution, what we're celebrating is that Constitution was a legal document saying you exist.
Right. It was adopted in York. It was sent out to the states to be ratified. Some of the ratifications came right away. I mean, within a couple months of it was adopted on November 15th, 1777, and by January, February, we were getting states back saying our legislators have approved this Constitution. It wasn't formally adopted and formally ratified until 1781. Maryland was holding out. There were some issues that Maryland had with the document, so they held out. So it wasn't, it had the force of law, but it wasn't binding in the sense that all 13 colonies agreed to it until 1781. Actually, 12 of the 13 agreed to it pretty quickly. But so it had the force of law, and that was enough for France.
And that's the amazing thing. You don't exist until there's documentation and signatures that says, hey, we're all together.
Right.
So, Jim, there's so much, I have to ask yet, but I do feel as if we're running out of time. And but before we leave, I'm hoping that you will consider coming back and working with the New Oxford Historic Society, which I'm sure you are, and community media to celebrate these events and give the opportunity for our viewers to celebrate some awarenesses. For example, it's hard to believe that, here you are, you're living in New Oxford, but there was a time period where all it was a path to York, It's incredible to believe what was the motivation of the people who came here during that time period. What was their challenges? What was their motivation for the people who came here in the early 1700s?
Right.
So there's some things that I'd love to share with our viewing audience at some point.
Right. Yeah, I would just say, because you put it on the table, just a way to think about Abbottstown, New Oxford, and even Gettysburg, they were stops along the Great Wagon Road. The Great Wagon Road started in Germantown, or it started in Philadelphia. Immigrants would get off the boats there, and they would start their trip to South Carolina and Georgia and Virginia by going through these towns. And so there's different ways they went. Some of them went up through Harrisburg and into the Cumberland Valley, through Chambersburg, what's now Chambersburg. But many of them would cross the river at Wrightsville. They would go to York, and some of them cut off. I think that the majority of them cut off and went down to Hanover, down to Frederick, and through the Gap into the Shenandoah Valley at Harper's Ferry and so on. But a significant number would keep going west, and they would go through Abbottstown, New Oxford, Gettysburg, over the mountain, and then they were in the Cumberland Valley, and then they go to Shenandoah Valley and on down to the south. So New Oxford and these towns are here in part because of their position on what was then the major highway in America.
Which originally was just Indian trails.
Yeah, many of these were Indian trails, and for example, the Great Wagon Road from the Susquehanna down to Hanover and down to Frederick was called the Monocacy Trail because it connected the Susquehanna River with the Monocacy River.
Okay.
So it's an Indian trail that the American Indians used to go from one river to another. And so, yeah, these were small paths. In fact, many of these roads around here weren't paved until 100 years ago. Many of the small towns, like, I don't know this for a fact in New Oxford, but many towns, they were just gravel road or dirt roads up to 100 years ago, whenever the automobiles came into play.
Right.
And you wouldn't necessarily want paved roads whenever horse and buggies and wagons were the major way to get around.
Mm-hmm. Before we leave, you're also associated with this movement that you talked about. Is there a name for the local history movement of that's occurring that you see occurring in Lancaster and York? Is it organized?
It's not officially, and it's not organized in a strict sense, but I call us memory boomers. Neil King said there's a memory boom going on, that we're interrogating the past. We're bringing new insights forward. We're owning up to problems in the past. We're celebrating those things that went right. So there's a memory boom. And he said this should be a model for elsewhere in America. I'm so proud of that. We were able to, in his book, American Ramble, he said this and explored. He spent a couple of days in the York County area. So I think that I would just call us memory boomers, and a lot of the activity centers around the York County History Center, which has a new museum and is really I would recommend it to anybody to come see it. But they have a really rich archive there. So the archival material they would have there would cover Adams County up to 1800. And Charles Gladfelder helped with that library in his early days. And so, I think that's it. I think that's a recognition. Another thing I'll just mention quickly here is that a couple of us counted one time, how many people in York County who are doing history are below 50 years of age. Because that's always the question, right? It's always the question, how do you get young people involved? And we counted at least 75 people, just people that we knew. We're talking about high school teachers that are teaching. You're talking about people at local historical societies. We counted. There's 75 people throughout York County. So there's another generation to come. That's a great thing.
And you also have the Retro York Facebook group.
Right. That's a great organizer, no question about that. I moderate that group, for the Daily Record. It has almost 40,000 members. And so that's a place where you can aggregate, you can pull in material, stories, photos, videos from all over the region. And people are really responsive on there. They get on there, and if someone has a question, they answer it. And I moderate it, and I try. And it's a very productive group. There's not that many, let's say, sideways conversations where people. That's what Facebook is known for, is for people going off the rails. It doesn't happen there. So we're able to stick to history and culture in the region, and it's just a wonderful organizing thing for this memory boom.
So it's a great mechanism to connect people that share the same passion.
That's right. Yes, a good way of saying it.
Then you have Witnessing New York.
Yeah, that's a website that a young historian, Dr. Jamie Norpel, and I operate, and it's really tied in some ways to the Sites of Conscience movement, and that's where you find sites in your county and your locale that are that have a meaningful represent a meaning in a significant way in a community. A member of the Sites of Conscience, for example, was the Seminary Ridge Museum. So that's one in Adams County. It might be the only one in Adams County. And so we find places in your county that say a lot. They may seem like a forgotten place, but we bring out the significance of those places in a way that maybe people would have never thought of before.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's an amazing
great
concept.
Yeah.
What a way to celebrate the area that you live in, right, and bring recognition to something that might have been forgotten.
That's right.
So, and we will have the list of these websites and how people can contact. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
They can just email me at Jim McClure, that's 2 M's and 2 C's, Jim McClure 21 at outlook.com. Okay. I'm sure you can put that in the show notes.
Yes,
yeah.
we will. And is there any events that you'd like to promote right now, or?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, and without going too long into it, I've never been one that really seeks out, speaking engagements. But when you're in the local history community, that's really something you need to do, and especially if you're writing books, you need to go out there and talk about the books, and so many people in your county do that. I mean, many historians, that's just part of what they do. And so some historians are out there a couple times a week. You could be out there really 4 or 5 times a week, or maybe every day if you really if you can hold up that way. So I'm out a lot still doing those. I'm trying to watch that because I have to have time to be able to create my own material. And when you're out speaking a lot, you can't create material. You can do a lot of other things like meet the public and so on, and really tell about the material you've done. But it's hard to really work on other books and projects like that. So I've been very careful recently about that. But I would just say that if people are out there and they are looking for local history speakers, we have a list that is available, and we can put that in the show notes too. So if you're looking for a local history speaker, and these are great speakers like Scott Mingus, who's a Civil War historian from York County, June Lloyd, who is American Revolution expert and specialist. So so I have a lot of things coming up, and I'm speaking a lot on this very topic, the 250th of the Declaration of Independence. That's a gratifying thing to do, to be able to talk about this big event coming up.
But you also have a book that Never to Be Forgotten. You mentioned.
Yeah, I started.
That's your newest? Or?
Yeah, I started it. I did it in 1999, and then I redid it in conjunction with the 250th of. It was the 275th of York County. It just came out last year, and I just added, it doubled the size of the book and updated material throughout. So it's really a new book.
And it's about?
It's a general history of York County, starting with American Indians and leading up to the current, 2024. So those books are hard to do because you have to have a grasp on every part of your county's history, and so there's only been 6 of them done. in 275 years. So and so, for example, I was weak in the American Indians area.
Okay.
So I took classes, went down, there's classes down offered by the Zimmerman Center. And I would take classes, and you'd read a lot, like Barry Kent and the experts. Another area that no one had worked on, and so I didn't have anywhere to go, was the Latino community in York County. And so I did extensive work on that, so I could include it in the book. And so I have an extensive timeline of the Latino community. Latinos in York County really didn't come in numbers until World War II, when they came to work the orchards and the fields, because the guys were away at war. And so that's what their history is young, but it hasn't been told. But I was able to put together a timeline, which really could be a book, but that's what I mean. I need to create the time to be able to do that type of work.
What a rich community.
Yeah.
Latinos. Now, you said that you have a list of speakers.
Yes.
And you said we have a list of speakers. So where do we go to find that list?
Yeah, it's that list grew out of what another group I'm part of called the York County Writers Roundtable, and it's part of the York County History Center. It meets quarterly, and we have researchers in to tell about how they do their work. And part of that effort was part of that movement. That's part of the movement. Is we created a list of speakers, and it resides on a site another site that I operate called yorkblog.com. And so it's a story on the site, which I can share with you to put in the show notes. Okay. And so I'm glad you mentioned that, because the Writers' Roundtable is a chance for the historians to come together. We had someone from Lancaster come in to speak, because that's another part of this movement, is we're trying to bridge the river. And because Lancaster County is York's history, and York County's history is Lancaster County's history, we grew out of Lancaster County in 1749, in the same way Adams County grew out in 1800. So, but that river has been wide in the past, and so we're trying to bridge it and bring Lancaster historians over, and York historians are going over there. So one of the Lancaster historians that did speak to our group said, we need something like Writers' Roundtable over in Lancaster County. Chance for, it's really a chance for the history writers and students of history and the public that really like this stuff to come together quarterly to talk about their projects.
And that's interesting as you look at our area. The New Oxford Historic Society is going to York to get some history because we were part of York.
That's right.
And at the same time then, York was part of Lancaster. Well, Adams County has to go also to Lancaster County in order to get some of our history. But I guess people didn't start coming into this area until the 1720s, or?
Yeah, it would have been actually Hanover area, which borders Adams County today. It actually was settled in some ways earlier than the rest of York County was, because people came up through Maryland. And so there were the prescriptions that Penn's put on certain prescriptions about coming across until they could cut treaties with the American Indians. The Marylanders, the Maryland proprietors didn't have those same types of sensibilities, and so Hanover in some ways was established before the York area was, which means that some in Adams County was established early as well. But one thing we do know is that Adams County had enough population in 1800 to say we need to separate, because we have so much population. We have a certain percentage of us are criminals, and we need a court system, and we need a sheriff, and we need a jail, and we need to separate. And that's the same reason York County separated from Lancaster County. And the same reason Lancaster is separated from Chester is you need this infrastructure, because you have a certain critical mass of people that you need to, and a certain part of that critical mass are going to be corrupt. So you need a sheriff in town. You need a sheriff in town.
Mm-hmm. One more question, because we're taking a lot of time, and I have no problem with that, because I totally enjoy learning this culture. So the Native Americans, they're living in this area, and they were various Indian groups. Where were they?
Yeah, at least in the, just to kind of make it simple, in the York County area, the eastern York County area along the river, the major group was, at least starting in about 1685, well, actually 100 years before that, but they had their villages. The last village was 1685 was the Susquehannocks. And they were also known as Conestogas. And so they would have been prominent in 1685, and they would have been those that would walk across York County to the Monocacy River and to trap and to hunt and so on along the way. And so that would be the best known group that was in this area. And that's, we're very blessed to have a couple of museums now that are really digging into the Susquehannocks. There's a Blue Rock Museum over in Lancaster County that's doing that. There's a Zimmerman Center in Long Level in Lower Windsor Township in York County. And then there's Indian Steps Museum in southern York County, southeastern York County. So we have 3 museums or research centers that are looking into the Susquehannocks today. And that's 3 more than we would have had 25 years ago.
And then there was a big war between them and the Iroquois?
Yeah, they were part of the Iroquois, and there was often were battles between these groups. The major Susquehannock's major issue was the settlers, the white settlers, and the disease that we carried, and then the settlers, they would. They would encroach on their land, but they would encroach after at least until 1736. In 1736, the last treaty between Penn and the Indians was enacted, and that's when York County and Adams County really started being settled at that point, because then settlers could move across with the Penn's blessing, and with the Indians' blessings as well, because there was a treaty to enforce that.
And that was
1736. Wright's Ferry went in 1730, so they had a way to get across. That was at Wrightsville, in Columbia and Wrightsville in 1730, and so there was some activity before 1736, but most of let's call it the tsunami, happened after 1736.
So prior to the ferry, people just took boats across?
Yeah, they would have taken, the American Indians would have taken dugout canoes across, but there have been ferries going across before. There was other ferries, makeshift ferries, but the major authorized ferry came in 1730. But they would have taken, flat boats and so forth across. They really weren't supposed to come over here and settle before 1730, but they did. Some did. And they squatted, and they were in many ways illegal, but they came across, and mainly in the eastern part of York County. But then after certain things, after the treaties were approved, they came here in large numbers. And so many large numbers that 14 years after that 1736 treaty, York County asked to separate from Lancaster County. Again, too many people needed a sheriff.
There we go.
Yeah.
See, I believe right now, I feel like a historian where, I've been saying for the last 15 minutes, we have to stop talking. We got to stop talking because, we're running out of time. But when you have the passion in your heart, do you ever, is it hard to leave another person that is a historian? Is it easy to stop talking and leave? Or when you meet, are you late for your next meeting because?
Yeah.
Do you find that? Or?
There's a lot. Oh yeah, there's a great community there, and you can learn so much from your peers. And one of the things that's really in the York County history community that really draws us together is that we have a really good barter system in play. And by barter system, I mean if someone helps me publish a book, which Scott Mingus has done, then right now I'm reading a manuscript of his. And so you just do it as a colleague. You don't charge, that type of thing. And so you have all this capital of each other. If someone wants you to look at an article that they've written for some publication, you do it because they'll do it for you. And so that we could talk about that a lot, but because there's a lot of that going on where you're trading. And there's more today. We're growing in our appreciation of good editing. You know, at one time in the York County history community, if you proofread something, then that was editing. But there's a lot more to editing than catching typographical errors. There's checking of facts and checking of ideas, and so. And just making sure that that an observation makes sense, that holds up against something else that might have been stated earlier in the manuscript, that we're consistent throughout, that there's an argument to begin with, that the title they're choosing for a book is whether it's concise enough or too wordy, or so there's a lot. So the idea of editing is really taking root in the York County history community, the value of editing. And so I think our books that we produce are higher quality in many ways than what was done in the past.
It sounds like you guys are unified. It sounds like you're unified and helping each other be the best that you could be.
That's right.
And sharing each other's skills and talents in order to do that.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you're a fraternity, a community.
I think of it, yes, I think of it as a bit of a cohort or a movement. When I started doing this in the 1990s, it wasn't necessarily me that did it, but in the 1990s, there was kind of gatekeepers that would approve or not, whether something should be published, or it was kind of an informal system that there's certain anointed people that would have a say on things. But what happened is, especially when working for the newspaper, I wasn't subject to any gatekeepers. I could just publish stuff, and then when the internet came, everybody could become a publisher, and so it really flattened out the structure of the community, the historical community. And there's downsides of that, is there could be erroneous stuff that goes out there, but the plus side is everybody can feel empowered to tell their stories. Mm-hmm. And that's what you have there. You have a very strong digital community in York County, and people are using these digital means and in the written mean, and the printed means as well, to tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then there's some unwritten rules or written rules that if you say something, back it up.
That's right. I think that there are, if I say something, if I write something that's wrong. Number one, if I'm writing something, I have something out right now that a couple people are looking at, and they have a chance before it's published to tell me it's wrong, and they will. They'll tell me that you got it wrong, or you really need to check that. And if something is published, then people will feel confident enough to come up to you and say, that's not really my understanding. You ought to check on that. Mm-hmm. Or I don't quite see it that way. And so it is a really it's like a cohort. It's like you are moving in the same direction. You're among friends, but you're among friends that really will challenge you and aren't afraid to challenge you. That's not the case in every community.
Which is good.
Absolutely.
Especially if they challenge you and you don't feel defensive,
Right.
I think that's the atmosphere at the New Oxford Historic Society also.
Yeah. There is this, and this was the case in York County Historical Community, I don't think it's as strong now, that people were territorial about what they were covering. They wouldn't really tell you or whatever. But I always say there's so many stories that need to be told. If you're working on a story and someone else is doing the same story, well, you'll tell it in different ways anyway. Mm-hmm. And so don't really worry about it. Just tell your stories.
So is there any question I should ask you that I didn't ask at this point? I mean, there's many, I'm sure, based on the history of this area, but no.
Oh, it's been really thorough, and thanks for the opportunity to talk here with you today.
Yeah, I had fun.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the people watching?
Yeah, I would just say, really get into the 250th. Many communities across Pennsylvania, across America, are really capitalizing on this 250th as a way to really understand the roots of our country, and understand our country, the pros and cons of how we came about. And that's certainly true around here. There's many committees and many communities that are that have already formed to tell the stories of their community 250 years ago. So I just urge everybody to get involved in that. And in Adams County, just do realize that your county's history is your history, and vice versa. Your county needs to understand that in the 1700s, Adams County history was York County's history. There's a lot that went on in the western part of York County in those days that we need to understand better. So I would just urge you, both York and Adams County, this is a chance for us to come together, and maybe in a way we never have done, or haven't done recently.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for watching this segment. And it's our culture. It's our identity. It's almost like you're saying that you had a sister that you never knew or a brother that you never knew. I mean, if you look at, you know, Adams County, you really were York. Adams, you were really Lancaster. But we grew up, didn't we? We grew up and became a self-governed area of Pennsylvania. So this is interesting. Celebrate the 250th anniversary. Is there any activities that you really would encourage people to go to?
Yeah, in York County and York County History Center, they have an exhibit that's coming up in conjunction with this called the Revolutionary York. And so that'll be opening before July 4th. And there's an installation going up that's going to focus on the Articles of Confederation. Even though that 250th will be next year, the Articles of Confederation, they're going to erect that installation this year, and that's called Hard Bargains, because that was really, it was some hard bargaining that went on to get that Constitution in place. So that will tell that story as well. So both those are coming up this spring, or at least before July 4th.
There's a lot of history to talk about, isn't it?
We could talk here a lot longer.
There you could. But that's why we want you to come back.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for watching, and until we have another awesome individual from our community, like Jim, come in and share what they're doing. Stay healthy. And remember, you are precious.